I feel my purpose is to remember the ceremonies of these lands. For any intentional journey or ceremony, it begins with a sense of what do you hold sacred? What is it that you value and that you wish to bring into a space to feel that quality of sacredness that connects you with a higher power, the Mother Earth, or any God's realms that you wish to experience in that sacred space. Just sit quietly with a tree. That's really all that's needed to start to shed those layers of doubt.
Hello and welcome. Thank you so much for being here with us and spending your time listening to this podcast. We have now begun our latest learning journey from me to we. You are still so welcome to join us or to join for the speaker session that you're interested in. This week's was incredibly moving, and it really is such a gift to hear from these humans. Next week, the theme is We Are All Entangled, with Jeremy Lent, Nazreen Sheikh, and Sally Kempton. We will be exploring these questions. How can we shift our understanding of karma from an individual to a collective embodied inquiry and practice? How can collective karma actually invite more space for different belief systems and diversity on the path? This week's episode is another special one. It was recorded live at our summer weave at Embercombe in Devon last year. You can hear us singing and get brought into just a little bit of the joy that was present on this retreat. We're not planning to host a weave this summer, but a 1 or 2 night event is possible later in August or September. And we will be hosting more smaller gatherings, dinners and workshops. The next one is in London, a picnic on Hampstead Heath on Saturday the 18th of June. You are so welcome, and you can also bring friends and family. You can find out more about this on our website, and if you don't already receive our newsletters, then please sign up for these, as that's how you will find out about all our events, both online and in person. Please do also join our membership, where you get a discount to all our events, as well as a space to connect with others who share your questions and vision. This episode is dedicated to Fiona Barnes, the mother heart of Embercombe, who died earlier this year. She was so full of love and stories and walked around the land barefoot, no matter what the weather. She was such a joy to collaborate with on the weave and made us feel so welcome there. Our guest today is Isla Macleod, a ceremonialist and companion at thresholds, devoted to honouring all facets of life and death. She facilitates rites of passage ceremonies, rituals, retreats, and healing journeys to celebrate the changing seasons and life transitions in a meaningful way, to support a remembering of our innate wisdom and the depths of our belonging to the earth. Through her work of attending to the more than human world, Isla fulfills the service of a traditional medicine woman, providing a bridge to the unseen and restoring balance to the web of life by collaborating with nature and undertaking journeys to help heal our separation from the natural world. Devoted to remembering and reimagining the indigenous ceremonies of her Celtic ancestors, Isla has spent time living in solitude in the woods, apprenticing with the U clan, exploring ways to honour the dead and these lands through pilgrimage, grief tending, water weaving, and community celebrations. At the heart of her work is the practice of learning how to meet death in a good way, to enhance the richness of life, and prepare for becoming a well and wise ancestor. She has a book coming out this September and regularly hosts workshops and retreats that you can join. In this conversation, entitled Guided by Tree Whispers, we explore the themes of shamanic ceremony, belonging, and the yew trees, where we speak to the question, how can we cultivate ceremonies of transformation and belonging? I hope that you enjoy this episode and it inspires your deeper relationship with nature and community. Welcome to All That We Are, with me, your host, Amisha Gadiali. On this show, we explore the weave between activism, the sacred, creativity, and regeneration. The spaces where our inner and outer worlds dance. From healing trauma to nature connection, to new technologies to ancient wisdom, it's time for us to move beyond silos and into an integrated way of being. Every one of us has ideas and personal experiences to share that can lead us to a more beautiful future. Despite the challenges we face as a global community or the pressures we meet in our daily lives, when we stop and dare to listen, to ask ourselves the big questions, and to share what we are already doing and envisioning, we create the futures of our wildest dreams. And we begin to embody all that we are becoming, and all that is possible. Isla, it is a delight. We are here at Embercombe in the mystical lands of Devon, in a room with so many beautiful beings, having just spent days together in practices and inquiries and around the fire, and with so much song. Currently, we have only baby Finn's song in the room. And I felt that what would be a really nice way to open this conversation is with a song. And there's a song, Isla, that you shared just by the fire last night.
A weaving song.
A weaving song. Can you weave us into the song?
Yeah, I was to introduce it too as a song that was shared with me by a lady called Azul on Dartmoor. And we were spending a day weaving cloths in honor of World Water Day. So imagine 40 or 50 women kind of squeezed into a room, all weaving and singing for about 8 hours. And this song. Weave and spin, this is how our work begins. Mend and heal, spin your dreams and make them real. Feel free to join in. Weave and spin, this is how our work begins. Mend and heal, spin your dreams and make them real. Weave and spin, this is how our work begins. Mend and heal, spin your dreams and make them real. Weave and spin, this is how our work begins. Mend and heal, spin your dreams and make them real. Thank you. It's always lovely to start with this song.
Thank you. And gorgeous to hear the symphony of voices of this gathering of weavers. For you, Isla, rites of passage have become such a big part of the work that you offer. And it's often something that we realize only when we realize how stripped out of the dominant culture those rites of passages are. There's a nice continuation of a panel that we did earlier in the summer with Heli, who's been organizing this event as well in Noisily. It came up a lot, especially around teenagers and this transition from child to teenager into adult is very badly managed in dominant culture. But another thing that's really been coming up in these conversations around what it is that transforms us into somebody that might be more devoted to what future we might be creating is that often it's themes around birth and death and coming up to these moments where suddenly life, it speaks to us so loudly and we have to find another way to relate to it. Can you share with us what rites of passage mean to you and why you felt called to offer that work?
I think it started from feeling the absence of honouring in my life, of transitions that felt significant in terms of a transformation in my life, and wanting to acknowledge that I was letting go of something and stepping into a new way. And there wasn't the village to witness that or support me. There weren't the elders to share me with the rituals or the stories. And as you say, that transition through my adolescence until early 20s was rife with trying to find that in very misconstrued ways. So through a recognition of the culture being devoid of that honouring of the sacred, of our rites of passage, I looked elsewhere in a way from having experienced cultures when I grew up that were rich with ceremony in Lagos in Nigeria and in Japan. There were a few other influential people and cultures along the way, but I really wanted to find the rituals and ceremonies of these Celtic lands where my ancestors come from. So it became a quest, really, of wanting to, for myself, find ways that I could really honour. For a start, actually, the first self-initiated rites of passage I undertook was for my 28th birthday, and that's your sort of Saturn returns coming full circle. And I was undertaking a shamanic training at the time, but knew there was this longing, a real soul longing to meet death in some way. And I think in our culture, there's such a denial of death and aging and decay. And I just felt that there was a part of me seeking that soulfulness in what it means to be alive and to know how to die well. And what rites of passage allow is a practice run, essentially. So any rite of passage has 3 phases to it, which involves a letting go, release of the familiar, the known, and then you enter the liminal space. And that's where it's like the cocoon of a butterfly, when it's having this experience of just being remade, reshaped at the potter's wheel. And then you return or come back and are welcomed and held by the village. I didn't have the village or the tribe for this initiation I undertook, but I had the trees as my witness. It's been this slow process of coming back, it feels, into the human kingdom of beings, because for me it was always the more than human world that offered me a sense of belonging. And so through that experience, it just became clear how vital it is for us to take a moment to pause in our lives, acknowledge those things which no longer serve us, that which we need to let go of, and really set our compass about which way we want to go. So I've undertaken a few different explorations with people and by myself. I reenacted a menarche ceremony with a group of women older now who had all really grieved the fact that we hadn't had that. And it was beautiful. We just all brought something that we would have wished for at that time and created a ceremony that was really tender and powerful. And the more I do this work, the more I see the way that our souls can really be enriched by it, and by ceremonies as well as just rites of passage. But that seems to be what life is, really, is a continuous rite of passage.
Some of our friends listening might not know what a menarche ceremony is or what that time of life is. Can you share how you honoured that, even if it was after the fact? Because it's a really beautiful invitation that if we haven't had these things, we can still give them to ourselves and to each other.
This menarche time is a time of transition for a woman, for a child, a girl becoming a woman in the early teens. The menarche is actually the first bleed. Historically, this would have been a time of the elders, the different generations of women coming together to share the wisdom and the power of what it means to be a cyclical being, to understand the power of the cycles and to know that you are a creative being that can birth life. So what a menarche ceremony can offer, I believe, is a deep empowerment for any young woman that's stepping into the world. And it can involve many things which might just be a sort of celebration of, and that can be, pampering with foot baths. We had a lovely herbal foot bath to let go of our sort of childhood. and offered the waters to a tree and just asked that all of our childhood, all that we'd learned, help feed the village and us as we grow. And we also explored a journey. So we did an inner journey to meet our grandmothers in a beautiful cave. And from that place came out of the journey and wrote a letter from them to ourselves that I still have and I read. And it felt like it came from them. It really had a voice of echoes from a deep knowing of feminine wisdom. We made flower crowns and we blessed the others with that, and we blessed each other's feet, adorned ourselves in red ochre and our wombs. We gave them a blessing as well. We danced and we feasted on mostly red foods. Yeah.
Beautiful. When I remember just like the highly kind of almost like the sexualized way of like that particular transition being, like it being sexually active rather than about like becoming a woman and all of that. It just feels like we would have such a different world if we really honored that particular moment, and that if in homes the men also were part of that honoring, and the fathers and the brothers, and learned how special that is and how life comes from it.
Yeah, I think that's the power of these ways of ceremony. It's a connection with what is sacred and what is of real value beyond time and space, these very natural cycles that we go through, and with that, the wisdom that we've really lost in our culture of understanding, for instance, the wisdom of the darkness of the winter and constantly striving for that more expansive, outward, sociable summertime, which is denying all that richness that comes in the fertile, composting silence of winter. So I think bringing back or remembering, like regathering those ways that our ancestors would have honored these transitions and making them our own, making them relevant, feels really vital.
You mentioned in the Saturn return, I'm always surprised that more people don't know about their Saturn returns. And I feel like we have a handful of people in that time of life in this room. And I know that I didn't find out about my Saturn return until I was in it. I'd shaved my head and put all my things in storage and left a particular career and was at Burning Man, and someone's like, "Oh, it's your Saturn return." And I'm like, "It's my what?" and then you're like, "Oh, okay." That makes sense. What can you share about that time and how one can prepare for that time and also ride it in a way where one is able to really garner the benefits of it?
I also didn't know about it till I was in it, which maybe is quite helpful because then it gave it this context. But to prepare oneself for this coming back to the beginning of essentially the alignment of the stars from when you were born, 28 years later, it's the full circle. And I was going through a very big releasing of the world that I knew in the years prior to that. I'd left London wanting to go to teach English in the Himalayas, but I ended up going to live and work at a meditation retreat centre not too far from here. A year later, came out having not been a part of the world at all that I knew, technology, money, sought refuge in devoting myself to a life of spiritual service, but I didn't have an idea of what that could look like. I didn't think I wanted to become a Buddhist nun. It was a possibility, but I knew that I liked the drumming, I liked the costumes, I liked the adornment, and I didn't really see myself honouring that part in a monastery. So thankfully, through quite a deep winter retreat on Dartmoor, came out with this sense of, well, a knowing that I needed to live in the woods and I wanted to undertake a shamanic training. And this was all happening in the year up to my 28th birthday. And it all happened very quickly that I found this beautiful place in Sussex to live. And I moved into a yurt, and it felt this fully embodied sense of belonging for the first time in my life to this place, to this land. But there was a lack of trust, I think is probably the word, in myself, because I didn't have the elders or the handed down ways of knowing that I was longing for. I wanted to be an apprentice, really live and work in those ways. So I went to the trees as my teachers and started working with this. It's a Celtic lunar calendar whereby each lunar cycle you work with a different tree. And that became my way into a more earth-based spirituality. I was working with the yew tree to start with and had an experience of recognition with the spirit of yew being an elder and a teacher for me like I had never known before. Started visiting different yew trees around the country and just made it my mission really to understand more of the wisdom of the yew. It came through on a vision quest at this amazing yew tree, King Yew. He actually has a plaque called King Yew in the Forest of Dean, where I undertook a vision quest and came out with this idea of an initiation that would take a year to prepare for and that would culminate on my 28th birthday, not knowing about my Saturn returns. Yeah, it was a deep dive into exploring the more mystical realms and the underworld, and it was edgy. I'm not going to lie, it was very edgy. When I think back about that time, there were often moments I had to really check in with, like, have I pushed this into madness? Like, is it, I really wanted to shed the familiar, the known, the shackles of this culture. So I was quite intentionally going out, trying to really rewild myself and my soul. But where I was going with this initiation felt at times that I might have been taking it too far. And yet the conclusion of that journey, well, it continues in a way, but my 28th birthday, it was a very sweet and soft and simple meeting of death that I was probably hoping for something a bit more dramatic. But it was a sense of letting go of so much of the striving, of the not knowing, of the needing to know. 20s for me was just that. I was running from one thing to the next. And since then, since that birthday, I have just known myself in a different way. I know that I've started this next cycle, which will finish when I'm 56. And within that, we go through different phases. I believe that we have every 7 years a complete shedding of all of our skin cells. So we are literally reborn every 7 years. So to take time to acknowledge those 7-year transitions feels really important. And you can look at it in the medicine wheel, either the Celtic medicine wheel or the red path of Native American, where each quadrant, each direction represents a different phase of life as well. So the first 7 years is childhood, and then you have adolescence, adulthood, and then elderhood. And within that, like in the menstrual cycle, you have these different phases whereby we're learning different skills, we're gathering in, integrating it all, and then we begin again.
I've also cultivated a relationship with trees as elders, not having any actual elders alive, apart from my mother, and also on this land because they all came from a different part of the world. I go to the trees when I need that grounding, that embrace, that sort of stern direction. I had to teach myself how to do that and how to cultivate that relationship and how to be able to hear. And I wonder what you can share of your journey of being in that relationship with the trees.
Oh, how much time do we have? Okay.
Don't worry about time.
No, I can feel my heart. I get quite emotional talking about trees. I know that I spent a lot of my life feeling like I was apart and separate from the world. And it was being introduced to this ancient yew tree at Compton Dundon in Somerset as part of my shamanic training, when it was like this switch was just turned on of seeing for the first time a tree as a sentient being, as an elder, as a wisdom keeper. The lunar calendar that I mentioned that I started working with was a practice that enabled me to start to work with the different spirits of the trees of these lands in quite a deep way. So working with one tree a month, visiting, spending time in their company, which from my background was not familiar. It had never been something I'd been shown or introduced to. Some of my shamanic training did involve working with tree spirits, and it was really helpful of just like, how do we approach a tree? We can circle it a few times in recognition of the spirals of the stars and of life, circling round and introduce yourself by name and maybe with an intention of why you're there. And you can also start to work with if you approach a tree slowly from a distance of maybe 15, 20 feet and tune into the different energy fields of a tree, as we have as humans, just to have this awareness that it's not just the physical representation of a tree that we're connecting with, that they have a vast energy which goes way up and way down as well. And I really just began by seeking refuge in a way that was, I don't want to say desperate, but I felt very alone. Like I was living alone in these woods without any human company, and the trees became my familiars. They became a place that I would go and pray and cry and be in silence listening, which again was a leap of faith. I didn't hear a voice in response to my questions. I didn't see anything visually, but I began to unravel those ways of knowing that in our culture we have to see, or we have to be able to quantify something. And through a visceral sense of, okay, what's happening in my body when I'm sitting with this tree? How does it feel to have my spine aligned with the trunk? And just pay attention as a form of meditative practice, or being really curious to how it feels when you bring your grief and you cry and you share that with a tree. How does that feel? How does it feel when you come and you want to celebrate or share something with them and rejoice? And I just felt such a relationship grow as I began to acknowledge them as beings that could hear and receive me and love me as much as I did them. Different trees for me have very different wisdom and medicine. So certain qualities I might be looking for intentionally, like willow trees, very feminine, watery energy. If I'm feeling a bit stuck emotionally, or I feel contracted or aware of needing to create a space to release, to grieve, then I would go to a willow and spend time with them, or an oak. When I was in the days up to my son's birth, I visited this oak tree every day for courage and perseverance and that feeling of uprightness. And they're also a doorway, oak trees, dure in the Celtic, which means doorway. And I knew that I was crossing this threshold and that they were somehow the guardians, the gatekeepers of that threshold. Yeah, and it's different for everybody, I think, how we connect or how we relate, how we are in relationship. So everyone would have their own ways of approaching the trees, but it's definitely for most of us, I think, in this culture, a leap of faith that we think that we're making it up if we feel some response or, yeah, and that's something I urge everybody to just keep at it, that no matter what those voices say, just sit quietly with a tree. That's really all that's needed to start to shed those layers of doubt. That worked for me anyway.
And with ritual and pilgrimage, such necessary balms of the soul and connection to land and earth and life, many of us don't know how to do them or don't feel like it's something we can just go and do. What can you offer around taking your prayer out into the land? And also there can often be well, is this the right way to do it? And do I need all these bits? And have I got all the right bits? And and these kinds of questions that come up.
Yeah, I'm a lady that is known as the basket lady. Not because I have a basket case, but I love to have baskets and offerings and things to take with me on rituals and journeys, which is definitely not necessary. Part of I feel my purpose is to remember the ceremonies of these lands. So a lot of it has been listening, but also trusting in what feels like just spontaneous ideas that come up when I'm in a space where I've set an intention. I find collaboration really helpful. So if you're with other people and just kind of bouncing ideas around, having a playfulness that without an expectation of it needing to look or feel a certain way, or, well, maybe it's welcome to acknowledging the grief around not having those ceremonies, that we know that they've lasted and they've been worked on for many, many generations. But having this feeling of inventiveness and curiosity about what could this look like. For any intentional journey or ceremony, it begins with a sense of, what do you hold sacred? What is it that you value and that you wish to bring into a space to feel that quality of sacredness that connects you with a higher power, the Mother Earth, or any gods realms that you wish to experience in that sacred space. Intention is key. So bringing forth what it is really clearly. Why are you here? Why are you doing this? Why are you making this pilgrimage? What's the ritual for? Once you've set that intention in a sacred space, then anything can happen. When you're collaborating with spirit in that way, you might have an idea of some part element that you wish to add in, but my experience is often that things can just come in off the wall and be adapted, and then I'll get some flicker of an idea of, oh, take the water and flick it on the stones. Or I once was in a circle of stones. Oh, I'm not sure I'm going to share this, but
You've started now, Isla. You must finish.
I'd finished the first draft of my book, and I was going on a pilgrimage on Dartmoor to a place called Whitehorse Hill, which inspired a lot of my relationship with the ancestors of Dartmoor, of these lands. I'd had a beautiful day, and I got back to the stone circle at dusk, and I'd gone and greeted all the stones and just stood in the center and asked, what do you ask of me? What would you like from me while I'm here? And I got this really cheeky response in my head that was, striptease. I was like, excuse me? Striptease. That was the voice I heard. So I was like, okay. And there was, of course, that voice of, come on, this is ridiculous. But then there's this playfulness of let's follow that. Where's this taking me? And I had I've never done a striptease before or since. And it was a really liberating and intimate experience to be at dusk on the wilds of the moors, just wanting to celebrate these stones and give them a really good time. And
our closing ceremony for the weave has just changed. Isla's going to lead us on a striptease procession around the land.
Fun. Well, that's possible. You never know. As I said, when you collaborate in these ways, to bring an element of humor and childlike curiosity has been really helpful for me. When I was at first quite heady, and I still find it, that I just long to be in integrity when I'm in communication with spirit. I want to be listening well and attentive to what's being asked of me. But there is just a sense of needing to practice and keep, like any muscle, just keep going. With pilgrimages, there is a more accessible way to access that kind of ceremonial journey, because you have a beginning, a middle, and an end, like any rite of passage. And it can just be having an intention of where you're walking. It might not be that you know why, other than that you just really wanted to visit this place, it was calling you. But there's a process in that as you're walking, you are coming into deeper relationship with the spirit of the land. You're listening more deeply, you're shedding those layers of the busyness and everything else that we often experience in day-to-day life. And there could be insights or revelation, or often a releasing of a burden or a shedding of some part of yourself. So that when you come to the end, there has been a transformation and a death in a way, and a rebirth. So it can be so simple, there's nothing needed but to carry out a journey or a ceremony. I have, through the ways I've been trained, always call upon the 7 directions and the 4 elements. And I often work with the elements. They're really simple, they're everywhere. We can always find them somewhere. So that's a really accessible way in as well.
Yeah, and I'm a moon child, born on a Monday. And so for me, the moon is always so powerful. Making space for ritual around small things, but the small things that take up a lot of space in ourselves. And I love that when you finished writing, you went out to the stones. And I had a really poignant full moon recently at the ocean, letting go of a relationship that had actually, in physical form, been let go of a long time ago. But there was still a bit in my consciousness that was strong. And I had tried to do ritual with it before, but it hadn't been time yet, because part of me still was holding on to it. And then there was a particular full moon. I was like, it's ready to go now. And so snuck out into the moonlight, and there was fire, and there was rope, and there was song, and experienced this ecstatic feeling of the release, and then all the space. And then how I've related to that relationship, that human, that dynamic of what that relationship represented felt completely different in every cell of my being after that. And I know that it wouldn't had I not have gone out into the moonlight, if I'd just sort of been like, okay, well, yeah, no, I feel bad about that. It's gone now. It's over. But taking time to honor beginnings and honor endings, and also rituals for support at the times that when we don't know, when we're in the liminal, and finding a way to honor that and to honor that mystery and to ask for guidance to come however and whenever it may.
I did a ceremony to let go of an ex-partner too that I'd actually done about 4. It was an ex. I think I'd done about 4 for this one.
Yeah.
But this one time I had gone to a river and written a letter to him. Then I made a basket out of reeds and put the letter in the basket and gave it to the river. And I was driving not far, it's only about 1.5 miles back to where I was living. And I saw just off the side of the road a large bird, and I just swerved in, and it was a buzzard, recently died, but completely unharmed. And I had started working with birds and animal spirits and making feather bands and things. So a buzzard had been a sort of like, this is our eagle, this is the spirit of the skies. And I created these wings that I use in all my ceremonies now for blessing others. And it was sort of from that letting go of acknowledging the ending and cutting off energetically to this person that I found my wings, that I found this sense of freedom. And now I can bless others with that, that within each death, when there is any sense of an ending, we're going to be composting and renewing and regrowing. So I feel like the honoring of, the endings particularly and beginnings, but it's something that's really overlooked in our culture. And that's why energetically we're so swarmed with ex-lovers, bosses, people that have in some way left an imprint on us, but we haven't actually done the energetic clearing to let go of them, and experiences as well, not just people.
Bosses.
I've
never done any rituals for any of my bosses. Right, that's tonight sorted. Yeah, because they leave such an imprint, and there's a reclaiming that has to happen when you step out of those fields.
Yeah, and it's gathering back parts of ourselves that we go through in part of my shamanic training, working with soul retrieval. Any trauma that we experience, but that could be a significant loss of a loved one or an accident or some physical trauma, but it can also be these little parts of ourselves that just kind of splinter off throughout life so that we aren't wholly embodied, that we aren't fully in our power. So it does, for me, require intentional ceremony to call them back, to really bring these places back and give back energetically to those people that I might be carrying anything from, just so that we're really in our integrity and not aligned.
Do you have a regular practice of giving back, that where you might be taking up space in someone else's field?
Not regular. I have done some practices, tantric practices, jade egg related practices, where I have really enjoyed that, of and shamanic journeying, you can also do it where just the imagination. We can do so much of this work with the power of our imagination by inviting that person in and feeling in our body where there might be energetic cords where you can feel them connected and cutting them. Imagine whatever tool you wish, a scythe or a diamond sword, whatever you feel, to cut those places. And that creates an initial separation, but then there is this gift giving, as you say, which is me giving back, as a present, here is everything that you've gifted me and I'm grateful and thank you, and taking back anything of yours from them. But I probably only really do it when I notice it, whereas I think if you were doing it as a maintenance practice, that would be really, really healthy. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting around the energy. Often we focus on clearing, I'm clearing, I'm getting this out. And then you're like, well, there is an aspect of it that where we're all just so interconnected and the energy is always kind of flowing between us. We are always holding other people's energy in our field, and we can, because we're actually incredibly sophisticated in so many ways. And then often it's about, in these healing spaces and healing communities, it can be a lot about like, they've got this from me, they're draining me or something. And we don't often think, well, who am I draining right now? Or who am I like pulling energy from? And how can I feel sourced enough, resourced from bigger senses of source to not need to do that?
I think it takes real self-awareness to be attentive to that. And as you say, a sense of that connection of being supported by and not needing to have that codependency, which is obviously, very familiar to most of us, I think, because we haven't had that level of upbringing in terms of the village.
How do you see the importance or the relevance of this way of life in what we could create for the future and its kind of visionary aspects?
A life of ceremony and ritual and relating to the cycles. And it's a practice, but it is deepening my sense of belonging and connection in, say, not even 10 years from when I've been actively practicing this sort of way of life. If I look back at who I was then, very lost and no sense of home, no real kinship with the modern human world. In a relatively short time, it's become my livelihood, it's become my purpose to really create these spaces that honor the liminal, that recognize that we are changeable beings, that we're never set in one way. I think gives us the spaciousness to constantly be coming, be emerging, instead of being static, of this is who I am, which is vital because for now, I think so many of us feel stuck in a way of seeing this is the way this culture operates. How are we going to move through this? It feels too entrenched to imagine a world beyond Western capitalism. But when I tune into ceremony and gather with other people, community and ceremony, all I really feel is this amazing human potential and the possibility of co-creating together and this recognition of life as sacred, which are all vital things moving forward. And creating spaces where we come together to celebrate all facets of life and death and know how to grieve well, how to die well, how to pray well. All these things that weren't taught to me at school anyway. I feel like within a really alive and invigorated ceremonial life, we can begin to activate these pathways again of remembering how to relate and how to live fully embodied and relating to more than just the human world.
When you shared that it's a relative short space of time from not having a relationship with the more than human world to it being life itself, can you share anything about that journey and what it's taken to trust and to expand your vision and field of awareness?
There's definitely been stages along that journey. The intentional severance with a culture that I could not relate to, sort of coming out of university and being presented with my options and trying it for about a year in London and feeling that this was going to destroy my soul. Like I was already very depressed from my time at university. So going to live at a meditation retreat, which kind of was but it was just the antidote to what the culture was offering me, which was come to this quiet space on the land, tend to the seeds, tend to the garden, meditate, be in silence, have no technology or, drinks and drugs and things, which had been quite a big part of my 20s, was a shedding. And I think with any rite of passage, we need to shed and unlearn what we've been taught. I think that's what meditation has really enabled me, was just to start to become really familiar with myself, where there were the hooks, where there were belief patterns that saw things in a certain way. I had an amazing teacher, Rob Bayer, who was at Gaia House for a long time. I was a resident yogi there for a while and really struggled with going to the meditation hall, but would often be out on the land. And I came to him in one of the meetings and almost in a confessional kind of way, was like, I'm a bad yogi, I'm not sitting. And he asked me what I was doing. And I said, I'm just sitting with trees or just writing poems by the river. And he reminded me, of course, of where the Buddha was when he was enlightened, was under a tree. that perception of what a good spiritual life looked like, or, you know, an authentic spiritual life, was blown wide open by him, encouraging in me these places that were true for me and not trying to fit into a sort of mold. And also the insight that came in one of our sessions that our perception is malleable, which was huge and still for me when I noticed that I'm really shut down in a certain way of seeing the world. Just bringing a playfulness again and like, could I change this? And is this way of thinking liberating me, or is it creating fear or separation? Can I subtly somehow just shift that? So that's been really vital throughout the last 10 years of where there were doubts in connecting with a tree, or calling on my grandmothers to help me in a ceremony, or places where I didn't have the sort of rational ways of seeing things, hearing things, to trust that there was this ability to always recreate and renew and rebirth myself so that I could see things differently. And how do I want this world to look? Like following that path of beauty, like where's that going to take me? And as I said, I moved into this woodland yurt for a few years, and more shedding. It was the shedding of the familiar, and really wanting to find and meet my darkness. That was really integral for me to start to welcome those places that had been depressed, that I'd really struggled with aspects of myself and my mind, and welcome them in and just start to dialogue with those places in myself. Yeah, which is a whole story. But I think there was that intention of wanting to, like Rumi's poem, The Guest House, like really start to sit with and be present with all different parts of myself and get to know myself in a way that's, really intimate and caring and curious, so that I could cultivate more of that sense of trust with the way I work in ritual or ceremony, to know this is coming from a deeper place. This isn't just a flippant thought, and to trust that and follow it. But there's days, I can certainly go out and feel disconnected and I'm not feeling inspired, but I still show up. I think that's what for me has been really important with any form of practice, even when you're not feeling the flow of things and it feels a bit stilted or awkward and not really sure what I'm doing. I'll still show up and just do my best.
We are taking just a short pause here. If you are enjoying this episode, please consider joining our community. For a small contribution, you can be part of our beautiful online world, where we deepen the conversation and offer spaces of learning and practice. As a member, you are a patron supporting the making of this show, and you receive a number of benefits, such as special member-only events and discounts on all our courses, retreats, and in-person experiences. You will have membership to our app and connect with inspiring humans around the world through a social network to discuss the themes of the show away from the eyes of advertisers and the manipulation of big tech. Our membership is what makes us able to stay advertising free in a world that is always trying to sell us stuff we don't need. And it is the very heart of all that we are. Head to www.allthatweare.org/support to find out more. I want to open it up because we are here in great company. If anyone has a question.
My name's Maxie. Hello, thank you so much for this conversation. I've had my eyes closed the whole time and just feeling such resonance and like beauty of what you've been saying, especially about the going back to the menarche, to give yourself the gifts that you didn't receive. My question just really jumped out at me was about grief. If you have any particular ways of grieving. I cry in my car a lot and it doesn't feel like a very sacred honouring.
Thank you for your question. Yes, I found that during this journey that I undertook with the yew tree, which is also the gatekeeper of the ancestral realm, I was visiting a lot of these yew trees in graveyards, because that's often where they are. They predate the churches. Usually they were gathering points for the ancestors, pre-pagan ancestors. I would find myself, having been with the tree, weeping, and then I would start to go to the different headstones and just be with them, and sounds would start to come. I can feel it now. And there was an honouring in that, a sense of these forgotten ones, it felt like. And then I learnt about the art of keening, which is Celtic tradition of lamenting the dead and giving voice to grief. And it would have been women that would have held that space, often at funerals. And they would be professional mourners that would come and wail. And there's some recordings you can find that will move you to tears. And that was what they were doing. They were creating a space that invited the others to be able to grieve more fully. And it's across cultures. It's also in West Africa and the Dagara tribe. They have a really rich grief culture. So from that, and from this yew initiation, whereby I committed myself to live in service to the ancestors, my ancestors, grief tending became inseparable from that. To honour the ancestors, we must grieve well. And our culture doesn't really have those spaces. Even funerals are very subdued. It was hard at first because I had these really strong emotions, wasn't really sure how to hold them well. So again, the trees provided a sort of support for that, whereby it would often be just sitting with them, creating this intention to have a space where I could release with them and be really held. And that the tears would nourish their roots and the roots, of our ancestors, that in some way my grief would feed the dead, giving it this sort of sacred purpose, I suppose, that wasn't just like, oh my God, I'm losing my mind. I'm just crying constantly. So to create an intentional space for it. Through working more with it ritually in ceremony, I found that working with the element of water is really helpful. So a really simple practice that I do whole grief tending ceremonies, is that we have a bowl of water. Everyone, when they come to grieve, picks up a stone. And the stones are the record keepers, like they have all the memory, as does the water. But through holding one, there's a deepening in our ability to access those places in ourselves. And it helps to create a space first, like with an embodiment practice, just really coming into yourself, being aware of any stuckness or contraction and inviting those places to open. But just kneeling in front of a bowl of water with a stone and speaking, voicing your grief in whatever way until you feel emptied somehow, and then offering that stone to the water. So then that feeling of you've kind of emptied yourself, you're feeling the greater waters, that your grief is going forth. And then I would pour that water at the root of a tree, and you can either reuse your stone, have it as a grief stone, and you can keep it with you, or you could offer that to a river or a spring or the ocean. But water in its essence, obviously, is showing us how to grieve. It knows how to release, to cleanse, to surrender, to yield. And it can be the quietest lake or a raging ocean. Like, grief has so many faces to it. And I think having a regular grieving practice is one of the most valuable practices we can have in our life. It's beautiful in community to be witnessed and to support others. But until there's more available in our culture, just on your own, with a full moon is really helpful too, because your waters are full and flowing anyway. It's a nice time to do it. Thank you for your question.
Would anyone else like to ask a question?
Hi, Isla. I'm Jessica. Thank you very much for everything you've said. It resonates a lot. So obviously you're very deep into your practice and it's taken you many, many years to get to where you are. And you mentioned, going to live in the woods for several years, that kind of thing. Do you have any tips or advice for those of us who perhaps, for one reason or another, are not able or willing to do that depth of practice, but is there a kind of entry point for getting further towards kind of where you are? I'm not suggesting that we can shortcut it, but just, what would be the kind of gateway drug to where you are, I suppose?
Okay. Yeah, the gateway drug is the cycles. I've really spent time questioning this because I realised how lucky I was to be able to make those choices and live in those ways. It's something which you can do wherever you live. Slightly different if you're not in these kinds of climates with the seasons, I realise. I haven't lived in sort of equatorial climates for a while to know how that lands, but in the Northern Hemisphere and the Southern Hemisphere, to be able to attune to particularly the seasonal changes. So at the very least, acknowledging when we have shifts into the different seasons of spring, summer, autumn, winter, and in some way honouring that and acknowledging the phase of growth you've been through and setting some intention for the next phase. Within that, then you can start to expand to look at what's called the Wheel of the Year in the Celtic tradition, or the Sabbats for those more pagan orientated, where you have 8 festivals of the equinoxes and the solstices, and then you have the 4 fire festivals, Lammas, Beltane, Imbolc, Beltane, Lammas and Samhain. And those, for me, if I did nothing else, if I just had 8 ceremonies a year, it would be that. As entry points, as you say, they are ways of connecting with the ancestral lineage of those celebrations that would have happened for generations before us. They're a way of reminding ourselves that we are completely connected to the cycles of nature. So acknowledging what's happening in the outdoors, and saying, okay, so how does that land for me as I go into autumn, as we are now? Like, what am I shedding? What are things that are ready to be let go of? What too am I harvesting that I'm grateful for? And what are the seeds in that harvest that I wish to take with me through the winter and nurture for spring to sow again? And then there's the lunar cycles as well. And then within just each day, whether it could just be upon rising, the practice that I've been doing now since, where was I? So I'm doing a wilderness rites of passage training, and being able to wake each morning next to the River Dart and get up, and before I say anything else, would just pray to the 7 directions. So for the last 6 months, I've been doing that, just waking up, as soon as I wake up, going out just into my garden. And I don't live in the wild, I live in a town. So none of my neighbours have caught me yet, but it's something which I hope they do, just to think, in some way, yeah, I would wish for this for people that live in more urban areas, because I know it's taken me time to feel comfortable with the thought of being seen. Because I know a lot of, for instance, in my book, there's a lot of practices that involve going into the natural world to do a ritual. And I realised that in a city park, that's going to have a very different quality to being in, the wilds of Dartmoor. But the encounters I have had when I have been, except one, which was for a different reason, have only created a sense of connection with that other person. And I think for them, a real sense of curiosity. And, they've come and asked me, like, what's happening? What are you doing? And can I watch? There's this longing for people to be given permission to start to, I think, honour the sacred in these ways. But yeah, I think that the cycles for anyone can be a way of recognising that we are not separate from nature. And that's kind of, I think, the crux of what my journey has been about. A sense of belonging to the wild and recognising the cycles that we go through as well. To know that you're not going to be turned on literally all the time, that you need to have your fallow times as well to recuperate and regenerate.
Hello, hi, I'm Katrina. Thank you so much for everything so far. I feel, really enriched by this talk. I could relate to you sharing about feeling quite lost and alone for a long time. I think that's been my experience too. And probably lots of people in the room and maybe those listening can probably relate to maybe this ease of sort of going out into nature and feeling maybe some solace or refuge, or kind of being able to connect with nature, but maybe finding that quite difficult in our culture and with others. I guess my question is, I'm curious, through, a decade of how long you've been doing this work, have you found a sense of becoming a bit more okay, spending lots of time in nature alone, perhaps, and somehow that sense of aloneness maybe dissipating and feeling a bit more connected, not just to nature, but the world, people? I wonder if that, doing this work, kind of helps with that. Sorry, it's a bit of a long question, but I wonder also, over time, you've drawn community? I guess, has it become a bit more communal? I'm curious how that's evolved, I guess, if it has, and trying to find maybe a balance of learning to be okay with the aloneness at times and the loneliness, but also feeling the need for community and connection with others and sharing this stuff with others too.
Thank you. So I feel like we have a wound that is our sacred wound. Mine was around abandonment from going to boarding school very young and not being able to be with my parents. And I feel like my life, and I think that often whatever our wound is, the gift within our wound is sort of like our life then becomes living the antidote of that wound. So my life has become devoted to seeking connection and belonging, even though I regularly practice through my crafting of ritual and living more intentionally ways of attending to a place or, the river that flows through my town, and really cultivating relationships with mostly the more than human world. And I feel so enriched by that and a sense of community. But there are certainly days, like I'm a single mum, recently going through the experiences of lockdown. It was desperately isolating. And I would go to the tree in my garden. I have a tree temple, and I would cry and I would, just lay offerings down and sometimes feel sad that I still do feel that sense of aloneness, despite this way of living and the practices that I enjoy so much. For every day that I was writing my book, I would go to the river brew and gather water and carry it to the tree in my garden and offer it to these roots as a way of saying thank you for supporting me as I was writing. And the carrying of the water, just feeling like, gosh, I'm this carrier of life in my hands, with the water from the river, but also in my womb. And times when you can go from feeling so connected and aligned and, I've got my ancestors at my back, I've got the trees around me, and to then just being literally curled up in a ball next to a tree, wailing for feeling abandoned again. So it's not a linear path. I feel like I've come to accept that more and more. I was actually sharing with somebody, I had a memory of an experience here when I did the journey, which was after a sharing, and a lot had come up around this wound. I went and sat on a hill just down there and heard the earth say to me, I have never abandoned you. And the huge release from that feeling of knowing on some level that, of course, I've never been abandoned. I've always been held and loved. But no matter how many times I can repeat that, and it's helpful to repeat insights that come, because I think often we're on to the next thing. And when we don't stay in that state of kind of awakening or healing that we've experienced, it can so often just be forgotten. So recalling certain insights like that has been really helpful in journaling. But now I can't deny there's still a lot of feeling of loneliness and isolation that comes. I think I've become really okay with it because I was looking at the word belonging, and to be in longing for me is actually the gift of life. Like if I was basking in this connectedness constantly, I'm sure it'd be glorious. But I think that actually I love that, the yearning. And that's where my best poetry comes from when I'm feeling desperately lonely. And that's where my best music comes from. Like there's something, though it's not comfortable, I've really started to honor the necessity. For me, I feel like there is a necessity in it, like to really dance with those extremes and hold it all as being a part of this human experience, and that there is a dance. And I definitely have a way to go with human community, like cultivating more with the humans. I find that a bit more challenging, but I really, long for that. I feel that there's such a place for coming together with others, particularly when I see, experiences like this or in ceremonies, just the beauty of what we can create as humans. But it's, again, I think because I felt abandoned by the humans, the human world in some respect, it's a long, slow process of trusting again in others, whereas I can fully give myself over to a river or a tree.
Isla, thank you so much for what you shared and that you touched on the unofficial theme of this gathering, which is belonging. I was reading Toko Pa's book, Belonging, this summer, and then on one of the calls with the hosting team, we all decided to read it before the event. And in the opening circle, it came up a lot as a theme. I feel it speaks to the heart of where we're at in this particular dominant Western capitalist culture, where so many of us feel that ache. And even with these practices and even with these communities, that there's something that has been there for such a long time in our ancestry, where there's just this thing that's not quite been that space and that direct relationship and connection with each other and with the modern human world and with ourselves. And so we feel it and we long for it.
Yeah, I know from my journey and those I've worked with, or being in retreat settings where you hear other people's stories, whatever the story is, at the root of that, I think 99.9% of the time is a feeling of separation or abandonment or rejection. I wonder if we could ever get away from that, from the very literal act of having our umbilical cord cut, from being born and separating from our mother, whether that is the human condition to sort of spend our life. And actually, I wouldn't want to spend life any other way than tending to that longing to belong. It feels to me that that is a beautiful way to live, to be in service to that, to, wish to cultivate those sort of the roots that enable us to stand like a tree, really strong no matter what the weather is, to know that we are rooted and we can still have experiences where we don't have a clue and we're lost and we don't have the village or the support we need to work through something that we're going through. But knowing that on some level there is this great big mother that is beneath us, holding us, that we can never be apart from. In any relationship, it has to be two-way, and it needs to come from a place of acknowledging our responsibility in that relationship. What do we need to give? What do we need in return? So being that reciprocity. I wonder if we were feeling that depth of belonging all the time. Well, no, actually, I don't think that would be true either. No, I don't know.
It's the question, like, would we be moved to
act in those ways of real honouring and gratitude and thanks? But you would.
But we would, right? Because yeah.
And if we look at indigenous cultures that have that deep cellular, unbroken knowing of that, and they are, alive with ceremony and honouring and thanksgiving.
And warrior spirit to hold what everyone else is not holding.
Yeah, the warrior spirit. That was another sense I had just before I walked in to do this rite of passage for the end of the journey. I think it was Boudica. I remember somewhere, was it Joan of Arc? That the words, "I am not afraid, I was born to do this," comes up a lot for me when, there's edges that we have to meet constantly in life. If we have this sense of our comfort zone, as we get older, that's only shrinking unless we're intentionally extending ourselves and facing places in ourselves that maybe we don't want to.
Thank you, Isla, for sharing all of this beautiful wisdom. Can you share with us your call to action for all of our friends listening from here, from what we've been discussing? What would be something that you would invite everyone to go and do? And then also how we can connect with you and weave more in the future.
A call to action. Yeah, there's two things that are coming to mind. One more internal, which is to befriend the darkness, to sit with death, to really acknowledge those places in ourselves, what we may call the shadow. And this can be sort of literal ways of, as we're approaching autumn and going into winter, don't turn the lights on in your house when it gets dark, put a candle on, tune back into these circadian rhythms and avoid screens when you can, and go for walks at nighttime if you feel safe to do so. Start to really inhabit the darkness and start to feel what the fertility and the potential might be in that space. And kind of shadow dancing with those parts of yourself that maybe you have not wanted to look at, and in that space, forgive yourself. Yeah, that feels one call. And then if you're able, and you can do it inside, but if you're able within some walking distance of your home, preferably that you can visit every day. Create like an anchor point for yourself, maybe like just a place where you put a stone next to a tree that might over time be a place where you can visit and bring offerings of, seeds or some hot chocolate or a bit of tea, where you can go and spend time in stillness and just in quiet listening to that place, to cultivate a relationship with that place over time and bring your own sense of what beauty might be if you want to make a little earth altar, but to have an anchor point somewhere close to your home that you can attend to. That would be my call to action.
Thank you. And how can we connect more with you?
I'm on Instagram, which I'm quite active on, as Isla J. Macleod. And I have a website, islamacleod.com, which you can sign up to my newsletter, which comes out for the different seasons of the Celtic Wheel of the Year. Yeah, they're the main ways. And I do have a retreat coming up for Samhain in a few weeks, which is all on my website. It's called Rooted, the Art of Belonging. And it will be a sort of extended ceremony, including with Artemisia mugwort for an ancestral ceremony. Next year sometime I have a book coming out. Thank you.
Thank you. And it's been such a joy to share just a little bit of the energy of what we've created here at The Weave with all of our friends listening all over the world. And so I would love for us to close with a song, one of the songs that we've been sharing around the fire. We are the flow, we are the web, we are the weavers, we are the web, we are the flow, we are the ebb. We are the weavers, we are the web, we are the flow, we are the ebb. We are the weavers, we are the web, we are the flow, we are the ebb. We are the weavers, we are the web, we are the flow, and we are the ebb. We are the weavers, we are the web, we are the flow, and we are the ebb. We are the weavers, we are the web. Thank you, Carol, for the song and every single beautiful being, human and more than human, in this space and in this land and listening. Thank you for listening and spending your time with us. As always, you can find links to everything we mention in this episode, download our book, and discover so much more over on allthatweare.org. We give space to our guests to share their perspective without debating it or fact-checking, as this approach allows for deep, unedited conversations from the heart. We trust your discernment and wisdom to take what is useful and challenge what isn't in your own understanding. We offer spaces for discussion and integration in our membership community. We hope that you have enjoyed this episode and it has sparked some inspiration and creativity in you. We don't believe in selling you things you don't need through this podcast, and so it's made possible by you, our beautiful community. If you loved this and would like to connect more deeply with us, please join our membership. For less than a tea or coffee a day, you can access our community conversations and benefits such as our app and member gatherings, as well as being a patron whose support makes this podcast happen. Please also hit subscribe and leave us a review wherever you listen so others find us. All That We Are celebrates all that we are already and the untapped potential that lives inside us. It invites the full power of the more than human world, nature, the unseen, our ancestors and our future generations. It reminds us that we never exist in silo, through borders, timelines, or polarity, that in each and every moment, all that we are is here.